field, and why have you stayed in that field?
Well, I mean, the two of us are, I mean, I can't speak for both of us. We're still relatively young, so, you know, we don't have too many years of experience in the field. But, I mean, my background, and I mean, my major in undergrad was in the School of Public Health. I think I, you know, kind of had an interest in that area even when I started undergrad. And, you know, that opportunity arose right around the time that I'll just start over. I was the first class of people in the undergrad public health program. So the timing worked out, is what I'm trying to say. But I mean, I think I didn't anticipate that I'd be working in local public health after I graduated. And, you know, of course, my bio says a lot of verbs that I did, but I also got to do a lot of really fun COVID work over the last year and a half. And it's fun sometimes, you know, not often, other times. And, you know, now I'm working with the Michigan Fitness Foundation doing more evaluation work, but it's all still public health work. So, I mean, it depends on how you define field, I guess. I mean, this is clearly, you know, an interest area of mine that I've had for quite some time. And, but at the same time, like a field like public health or social work is like such an expansive field where there's so many different little areas to go into. You know, one of my big, you know, more interest areas is doing, you know, food systems and food access work in public health. And I was a food and health fellow with Eastern Market in Detroit after I graduated. And I think, you know, just finding opportunities, and now my current role, I'm doing a little bit more food and nutrition work now. So I think maybe this isn't really an answer to the actual question about why I've stayed here. I mean, the short answer is I think it's fulfilling, and I think I've, you know, kind of tried to carve out opportunities to incorporate, you know, equity and community-driven, you know, policy systems and environmental change work into, you know, the areas that I'm interested in. And yeah, I mean, I think over the course of, like, you know, my career, which is, you know, largely in front of me still, there's a lot of opportunities to kind of carve out those interest areas and find more ways to directly, you know, integrate, you know, CASC principles and concepts, if you will, into the work that we're doing. And I probably wouldn't be doing any type of career or job if it was not community driven and community rooted, and the, you know, the core or the values or ethos of the work going on. And so, I mean, I think maybe that's part of the why is, I think, you know, there's a lot of that baked into the type of, you know, roles that I've pursued, and the kind of career path that I'm on. And again, like having community input and data, and however scientific or not scientific it is, you know, having that be a key part of all the different types of, you know, work going out there, right? There's so many nonprofits that get all these grant funding all the time, and government doing all this work. And if none of it's rooted in what community needs and assets are, then it's really a waste of all of our time. So that's really, and that comes right back to social work, you know, core principles and CASC. So I think that's kind of the root of what I like to see myself doing. And so maybe that's kind of my way of getting around to the answer is, I think, just making sure that's at the core of the work that I'm doing, which I think is fulfilling. Obviously, coming from, you know, the CASC background, that's kind of why I'm here. So yeah.
I loved everything about your answer, Jeff. Like aggressively nodding along. I think you did a fabulous job in kind of capturing that, and a lot of it resonated with me. And especially thinking about just what are your values, and trying to have work that reflects that. And for me, when I really stepped back to think about that, and knowing what values the profession social work upholds with our code of ethics and all of those things, I really saw a lot of overlap between my personal values with these professional values. And so I felt like that would be a really good fit for me. I would not be able to show up to work every day if it wasn't meaningful. And I know that's a huge privilege to be able to say that. But it wasn't meaningful. And Jay, I really appreciated you underscoring the community engaged approaches that are so crucial to really any field, even outside of public health, but especially in public health too. And so that is that's how I navigated that, kind of found this specific field. And I will say, to kind of touch on it maybe from a different angle. So traditionally, social workers, you picture more of a therapist or one-on-one counseling, maybe some case management support. And I am very different than that. And for good reason. I think I'd be like the worst social worker in the traditional sense of it. I give a lot of credit to those folks who that just falls within their strengths, and they're really skilled and wonderful. But I think that really paying attention to the strengths that you have and trying to apply and match that with any sort of professional values is a really also strong way of finding the correct field that seems right for you and meaningful for you. And for me, I am much more that behind the scenes kind of person. I want to plan, and I'll get real nerdy about it really fast, but that's where I thrive. And so I think to be able to pair those strengths coupled with the values and really trying to work towards a vision of health equity and utilizing community engaged approaches to that, everything just kind of came together in this nice package. And so when thinking about what field you want to enter into, those were some things that were important for me and might be worth for others to think about. Obviously, each person is different and prioritizes things differently, but that's how I found my little spot.
Yeah, thank you so much for your answers. You guys are so interesting. It's so great. And so for the next question, I know you guys already touched on this like a little bit before in your like previous answers, but how has your CASC degree helped you with your current degree, and how did the core concepts of CASC inspire your work and what you're doing? If there's anything you can add to like that type of question.
I don't know if I have too much to add, because I really feel like even if I didn't mean to answer that earlier, I've answered it. But I think I would actually just kind of just decide to tack on to what Helen just said. And I think, now that I'm doing a little bit more evaluation work, and that's kind of nebulous in general, but basically what we're doing is taking, data collection from our different community partners that are implementing programs. A lot of our work is based in SNAP Ed, which is just basically different, nutrition and direct education and community initiatives around nutrition and physical activity. And so we collect information from participants who are going through these programs from, nonprofits are all around the state or school districts that are implementing these programs. And then, our job is to hunker down in front of, a qualitative analysis software, or R if you're really good with the quantitative stuff, and, chug out this result that says, this is how effective, these programs were. And then we can look at that and, where we're reaching, these programs and how effective they are. And, are they more effective in these ages? And, over time, we can have a strong evidence base for, what's the best way that we can improve, overall quality of life around the state. And, sometimes the day-to-day, kind of talking about Helen was talking about, skills, is, sometimes the day-to-day of that work is it does get a little bit nerdy, right? You're like, I'm spending all day on my second laptop trying to do all this, data analysis work. But at the end, the outcome is, again, we're taking direct community input, and we're not publishing it directly, right? We're not doing it for research. We're putting it right back into the communities and right back into practice, and trying to see, how we can take community input and put it right back into, the programming that's, where all these dollars are going to around the state. So I think just to kind of, it's not really answer that question because I feel like I've already kind of done it, but just to kind of echo that idea of, sometimes the day-to-day work, and especially when you start off your career, right? There's so many steps you kind of have to take, and you try something out, and you're like, okay, well, I really don't know how much I'm, applying my values or my principles in this space, and how can I try to do that more? And I think there's just continued opportunities to, bring CASC, again, values, concepts, principles, whatever you want to call them, into the space. And it doesn't mean that every single day, like, you're, doing CASC, right? And I think that's why it's funny that we use CASC like a verb, is it is like very nebulous, right? And day to day, like, it doesn't really look like anything specific. It's that you're, infusing those values and those approaches to any of the type of work that you're doing. And so even if I'm doing analytical work, the core of that work is in service of, equity and, community impact and, all of those things. So that's sort of touching on that question, but just kind of echoing and plus oneing that, tying together those skills and values and how that can be fulfilling, or how that can guide, your career path.
And I'm really nodding along once again. And I do think I have, indirectly answered this question. But I guess I would just like to underscore that it's a transferable skill set that you learn in CASC. And so there might be really specific topic areas or things that you are passionate about. And that's so wonderful and so needed. And to really think, though, about what are the skills that you're practicing and then bringing that into other spaces. And I think being a part of the CASC community, there's sort of maybe mutual understanding or awareness of these values that folks uphold, and really trying to center social justice work and all of these other values and principles. But as you enter into different spaces, that's not always a given. And so then I feel like that's where that transferable skill set really comes into play, and using your advocacy skills. And maybe the advocacy looks a little different than what you're used to, but that core foundation and that practice that you learned in CASC is definitely transferable. And so I think just thinking about it in that way, and I don't think this is something that maybe I really even noticed when I was in undergrad, but it's just kind of reflection and looking back that I'm like, oh, wow, that was, my junior year self that was thinking about these things. And now it's a crucial part to what I'm doing in my day to day. And so I just think that might be helpful to think about, because especially in a world that doesn't always value the things that we do value as a community. And so to really be able to name that and see how it transfers to different settings is just really helpful. And I don't know, as Jay was speaking, that's just kind of what was floating through my mind. So I thought I would share it as well.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. I think I completely agree with you both. What I'm hearing is that, when you graduate from CASC and you go into the outside world and you're working, like the skills that you acquire, they kind of just integrate itself into your everyday life. And I think that's wonderful. I think that's something I'm personally excited for. It just becomes second nature, I guess. Moving on to the next question. And this is a big question. It might be very vague. But what is the biggest challenge you face in community action and social change at the moment? And what are some ways we can address this?
I feel like I'm now the default person to go first, but I feel like I don't know if I have a really good answer. Well, do you have an answer ready, Helen? I can let you go first if you have one.
Mine. So yeah, I can go ahead and.
Okay, go ahead.
I don't know. I totally have had the benefit of having more time. Sorry, Jay. So the biggest challenge. So I graduated grad school at the end of 2019. Graduated into a pandemic. Started my position, and it has been 100% virtual. I've only seen my office twice. And when you're trying to do this work, and I coordinate, it might be helpful to explain some context. So I work with a collaborative, so I coordinate with a diverse group of stakeholders, all related to the mom-baby population across 6 counties in Southeast Michigan. And being completely virtual is not really conducive to doing all of that work. And so it has been a really, really huge challenge in thinking about how to better engage, especially with birthing families, because there's, their feedback and their experiences that are really integral to shaping the sort of projects that we work on as a collaborative. And while I don't think that this is the end all be all solution, one thing that we've been able to do is to be able to offer compensation to community members for their participation in collaborative meetings and our work group meetings and things like that. And so in some way, I think it's kind of putting your money where your mouth is, right? You can't just say you value someone's input and then not compensate them for their expertise, especially when, there are these challenges and barriers to being able to participate in these meetings, and especially for birthing families. So we're able to offer participation stipends for folks, as well as some support to offset childcare expenses, so that way they can be present and engaged with the meetings. And so, like I said, I don't think that is the end all be all solution, and I'm looking forward as the world keeps opening up to be able to be at those community events and have that type of engagement. And certainly even in-person events, I do believe that the compensation should continue. But that's just been one little thing that we've been able to do to try to overcome that barrier. And with that too, I think just being really flexible, right? Like if you are lucky enough to be able to be in a spot and build those relationships with families, and especially in this field, talking about pregnancy or birth experiences or postpartum experiences, those are really vulnerable and sensitive topics for pregnant and postpartum folks. And so to really be respectful of that and trying to be meaningful when you engage, and being flexible and doing it in a way that works best for them. And so sometimes that is not a Zoom call. Sometimes that is, just texting back and forth really quickly, or maybe a phone call, and, being like, absolutely, like if there is a crying baby in the background, take time, do what you need to do. And so I think really just, maybe I'm getting pulled away from the question now, but, and just thinking about these challenges, just trying to be as flexible as possible and really honoring expertise, I think are two strategies that you can use to try to help navigate some of those challenges. I don't know if I actually answered the question too much. That might have been very specific to my focus area, but it is the first thing that came to mind. So I'll leave it there, I guess.
I mean, I don't think there's a way that I can, like, either of us can actually truly answer like the biggest challenge in this, like, never ending field. But I think, I think it's a little less pertinent to my current role, but I think this applies nonetheless. And I think not just with the pandemic, but I think that is a relevant factor is, I think, like political and social will, I think is like a big thing that I've noticed, especially working in local public health over the last couple of years. And I think even just, hopping between the, governmental public health and the more nonprofit public health space, like, not that that's the same for every single, governmental or nonprofit agency, but you can see like the environment is a different environment, right? And I think not that there aren't, the similar political and social will challenges in, nonprofit environments, or other types of institutions. But I think, especially in public health, but in other, fields like, or just general, political and social climate right now, I think in this country, and again, I'm not going to give a really good answer to this question, but, this is, I think those are some of the biggest overarching barriers that we're seeing, like, in our local communities right now. And it's what we're seeing, like, in the entire country right now. Trying to address, deep-seated, like, historical, and structural inequities in and, again, a lot of the work I do is in public health, but I think this applies to a lot of different areas and a lot of different political and social, concerns. And if we don't have, if you don't have administrative or institutional or political buy-in, then suddenly our jobs get that much harder. And, even right now, I'm not working for a governmental entity, but pretty much all the work that I'm doing is funded through the USDA. So, that's, kind of how those things work, right? And so, we don't have free will to do everything we want. And so that's kind of what Helen said about, that's kind of where advocacy, I think, can come in. And it doesn't always look like calling your senator, right? It doesn't always look like, showing up to Lansing, which I've done. And I think that's a great thing that I think a lot of us young people can do. And it's not easy, especially when we're in, much more virtual environments. We don't have group meetings all the time when you're an adult with like your old classmates to go and do something together. But, a lot of us are so fortunate to have like the type of education that we're talking about here that, we totally can leverage that in a political way if we, so choose to. But I think outside of, your typical like advocacy, I think a lot of it is just trying to do what you can with this space that you're offered. And I think that's what's hard is a lot of us, again, I keep using the plural, the plural we or us, but I think I probably am speaking for more than just myself when I say that I think, I and others associate, our career with what we're doing in our lives and what our purpose is and what our passion is and what our values are. And I think that probably is similar for a lot of other CASC folks. And, we wouldn't be doing, we wouldn't be learning about these things and trying to apply these things to our careers if we didn't want to have a fulfilling, career. But I also think, there's ways to, stretch the boundaries of your career to try to find ways to make an impact and incorporate, CASC. I keep saying these things, right? CASC concepts or values, but, just trying to incorporate, community and equity and social justice and all these like principles that are, not super concrete, but if you have that, confidence to bring that into your work, trying to do that whenever possible, but also not being, not forgetting that there's an entire world outside of our individual careers that we're working on where, these things are playing out at a state level, at a national level, at a global level, I mean, we just had like the climate summit, right? Like we could talk about how CASC intersects with like COP26, right? So I think there's a lot of opportunities out there. And I think with so many issues that relate to CASC, I think, that, again, that like political and social will, I think we've seen it with a lot of different issues. And I think the pandemic has kind of been a sore spot. But there's a lot of different issues that we've seen over the last just a couple of years, let alone, the last 5 years, 10 years, right? Where I think there's ways for all of us, or a lot of us as professionals to find ways to, not just do that in a way that's fulfilling, but, use this like very, and I'm speaking from someone who, probably could work more on this myself, but using like this very wonderful privileged education that we have from this great university and, use that in ways that are beyond just our own, career advancement and, trying to advocate for some of those changes that we actually would like to see happen. Not that those always turn out the way we want, but and it's not an easy answer, right? Like that's not a really concrete answer, but I think that's one of the things I've felt, in my career. And I think something that we're all kind of back burner feeling all the time these days, that intersect with, our careers and values and getting this, important work accomplished.
I know you guys kind of briefly touched base on this and kind of like what you do personally. But a question in the chat kind of referenced I don't know if you've personally experienced this, but in a social work class, we talked about burnout. Is there anything you can say as far as advice on how to avoid this? Or I know you mentioned kind of like setting boundaries and knowing kind of more or less your limits and like what you can do in the field, but is there any advice or anything you want to add in terms of that?
If you want, I can start us off again. So I think my answer is different because I'm not in direct practice. And so I think, that type of burnout and compassion fatigue is a different experience than mine. So I don't really want to speak to that too much. But just in managing my own workload, and I feel like there have been a couple other grants that have come through and different proposals, and my red flags are going up of like, oh, this is a lot. And so whenever got to this question is so pertinent to what I experienced today. But I think that for me, then being able to fall back on the relationships that I have developed, especially with my supervisor, have become really important. And so that is something I think in any position, and certainly you don't always have control over who is your direct supervisor and things like that. And, I'd certainly hope you have a strong and positive relationship with them. But really being intentional about building that relationship and building that support system. So that way, when things do become overwhelming or there's just one too many things on your plate at a time, that you have a team to fall back on. And so for myself, that has looked like, scheduling a check-in and being very transparent and saying, I need help figuring out how to prioritize these things, or maybe something does need to get moved off of my plate. And once again, that kind of just that self-advocacy point, point is what's kind of coming up in my mind again. Because it is really easy when you are passionate about the work and there's a lot of work that needs to be done to completely dive headfirst. And that's great. And I think people's passion is what makes them so beautifully skilled at the work that they do, and how they engage with folks. But also you need to remember that you are still a person outside of your work and that you have needs. And so just to really be clear about what those boundaries are, and to actively articulate to those who are around you. So that way, you have that sort of mutual understanding, and have set those ground rules. So that way, when unfortunately, often inevitably, you're starting to reach that point, you can say, hey, remember when we talked about that? Well, it's coming to mind for me now. And what can we do about this? And not being afraid to say that. That's a really, really big issue for me. I am always like, okay, yes, I'll handle this. And yes, I'll do this and all of that. And it comes from a good place, but it comes at a cost. And so really having enough self-compassion and respect for yourself to advocate and say, I care about this work, but sometimes you have to put your other needs first. And so I think that for many who are in the social justice field and feel such strong and passionate connections to the work, setting those boundaries can be hard. But always just remembering that, like, you're a human and you have needs and burnout happens. But there are things I think that you can do to set in place, and just taking the time to think about what is that? When is it I know my red flags are going off, and to be able to really name those things. I think there's power in that.
I don't think I have too much to add. I mean, I think boundaries are great. And I think as much as I, want to, kind of what I said earlier, is kind of like that, like, job crafting idea of like doing the best with what you can in your own, job or position. You are still only, a single person. And you have, other needs that take place outside of work. And I think, even for myself, like, I know we keep counting the months that COVID has been going on, but whatever, it's been like a year and a half, almost 2 years, right? Whether I was dealing with COVID directly, right? Like, doing contact tracing, like, that's certainly not exhausting. Or just existing as a human being, right? There's a lot of other needs and, physical and mental health things that we have to address as people. So I think, whether it's like your career or showing up, in the community, right? Like, CASC doesn't always have to be your job, right? CASC can be how you're involved in advocating for things in your community, or, getting involved in, whatever other like social movements or things that are going on, where you are, or for communities that are important to you. But, still acknowledging that like there's always going to be limits. And if you feel like, you're not doing enough and you have more time and capacity, then, go for it and use that energy and time that you have as a privilege. But if you feel like you're running into walls all the time, that's probably a good sign that, there are other needs that you have to take care of as a human being. And I think, for better or for worse, a lot of us have had to kind of run into that in the last, year and a half here. And with a lot of different changes, just realizing what you can do, and at the end of the day, like what you feel happy and fulfilled doing, and what, taking advantage of those things that, are the opposite of burnout, right? Like the things that are energizing or motivating, and trying to prioritize those things, again, especially in your career or in your community, and how that can intersect with CASC. But I think just in general, I think that's kind of a lesson learned, I think, from myself and probably for other people who are nodding right now. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I've only had my CASC journey so far because I'm just a senior, but I think I completely resonate with what both of you said. I think sometimes you try to change the world or save the world or contribute to your community in whatever way you can, big or small, and that can be exhausting sometimes. And sometimes you just need to take a step back and take a breath so that you can get your energy back. Okay. So my last question for you both is, do you have any advice you would give to prospective or current CASC minors? And what's one piece of practical advice you would give to someone starting their CASC journey?
I can go first this time. I think the biggest thing, and I think honestly this could go for more than just CASC. This is like college classes kind of 101 a little bit, but just going for what is the most interesting, and like trying to just really dive into that. I think there's just so much flexibility in the CASC minor, and not that we all have, wide open schedules to do whatever we want, but I really do think taking advantage of the opportunities that are there, and making it something that's really useful and fulfilling. Again, I think, and maybe just on top of that, just like kind of bringing yourself to the CASC classes. Like I said, sometimes required classes for different, things that you have to do are not always fun, or they're not really engaging. But I think, something like the capstone can really, synthesize, I think, a lot of things that you learn in CASC or learn in your college career, or things that you learn as a human being, right? That you bring into the academic space, or vice versa, and then can take that away in skills, like Helen said, or, language, or confidence, and bringing that into, whatever you end up doing, school or work. So whether you're starting off or in the middle of it, I think just trying to, again, I think critical self-reflection is a big part of CASC, and I think a big part of a lot of CASC classes. And I think, even though, sometimes you don't really feel like doing your 100th Canvas discussion post, because I've been there. But at the same time, like bringing yourself into the work, into the coursework, I think, and following, your path or your interests, and trying to really show up in that space can make, the concepts and the content of CASC that much more meaningful and transferable. Just like Helen said, a lot of the stuff that, we've learned, we can kind of, if we shuffle around here or there, like there's applicable knowledge and concepts and, comfort level and confidence level with the things that you learn in CASC, that if you've done enough reflection and thinking about and connecting to your own values and beliefs and, views of the world or, interest areas, that you can really synthesize something that you can carry with you that doesn't just have to be something on your transcript. So that was kind of maybe both in one, but that's probably what I would say.
So I'm thinking about, what I would say maybe to a freshman or sophomore interested, just do it. Words that popped in my mind, which that might be a little aggressive and I don't know, not usually my style. But I think the reason those words popped into my mind is thinking back to my freshman self and I was so nervous, all the time. And, I am more introverted and things like that. But I think just to engage and, take the step, and you might not know what it's going to look like, but it's going to be worth it. And so I think, when considering the CASC Minor, know that you're going to be challenged and you're going to be uncomfortable, and you're also going to learn and grow a lot as a person. And so to really, to lean into that, I guess, lean into it is much better than do it. I'll stick with that. And then for anyone who's currently in the minor, and I think Jay hinted at this a lot, but just being present in the spaces. And I know there's so much going on, and especially being an undergrad, it's understandable. You all have a lot of competing responsibilities, and it's a lot to manage, and that is so valid and so true. But I really would encourage you, when you're in those spaces, just to be present and let everything else sit for a moment, because I think that's when the real learning happens. And if you're able to do that, I think wonderful things come from it, and wonderful relationships as well. Most of the folks that I keep in touch with from undergrad were all from the CASC community, actually. And so I really do think it's a place where great things happen. And so be present and be engaged, because it really is, the 4 years of undergrad goes by fast. I know it feels like your whole life right now, and it definitely is. But, the skills and the relationships that you form really do stay with you past it. And so do everything you can just to soak it up and be there in the moment. I don't know. Having this conversation almost makes me nostalgic for those days. So I think you all are really lucky, and I think it's really cool that you're working to kind of build the CASC board back together, because a ton of great experiences came from that. And I think it's meaningful work that you all are doing. So enjoy it and go for it.
Thank you, everyone, for coming tonight. We really appreciate you guys, in speaking about all your experience with CASC and, how it intertwines with your career. And, I just really appreciate all the advice and, kind words you have. So thank you so much for coming to this panel. We really appreciate it. And I know a lot of other students, appreciate it, too. And we'll show this recording to them. So thank you so much. We're going to wrap it up now. Does anyone else have any final things to say?
I can just add, just echoing that. Thank you so much. I think your answers were really insightful. And I think we're definitely going to be getting in touch with you for future events, because we just want to be as involved as we can, take your guys' advice, and build a CASC board up again.
Yeah, it's truly inspiring to see that you guys came from where we are right now, and that how successful and how passionate you guys are about what you do. Hoping that we can get there someday, especially I know Anjali's the same boat. We're graduating soon, so kind of still figuring out life and realizing that it is possible to do what you want to do, and just kind of reiterating all of that. But we truly appreciate you guys being here, and I know a lot of other students will as well. So thank you guys.
Yeah, thank you so much for having us. And if you need anything, you have my information. Always feel free to get in contact. Even if you just have a question about something, it doesn't have to be a formal event or anything. I'm a resource available. So, thank you all so much.
Yeah, thank you. I was just going to say too that, I'm always someone, students have questions, or career things, or that one thing that you talked about was really interesting and I want to learn more. So, my inbox is open whenever I, refresh and respond to emails. So I'm always here to help out. But thanks for having me.